Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast. And now your host, EYAL Levy.
Welcome to the URM Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. It's crazy to think that we are now on our 7th year. Don't ask me how that all just flew by, but it did. Man, time moves fast. And it's only because of you, the listeners. If you'd like us to stick around another 7 years, and there's a few simple things you can do that would really help us out. I would endlessly appreciate if you would, number 1, share our episodes with your friends. Number 2, post our episodes on your Facebook and Instagram and tag me at EYAL Levy URM Audio and at URM Academy, and of course, our guest. And number 3, leave us reviews and 5-star reviews wherever you can. We especially love iTunes reviews. Once again, thank you for all the years and years of loyalty. I just want you to know that we will never charge you for this podcast, and I will always work as hard as possible to improve the episodes in every single way. All we ask in return is a share, a post, and tag us. Oh, and one last thing. Do you have a question you would like me to answer on an episode? I don't mean for a guest. I mean for me. It can be about anything. Email it to me at eyal@urm.academy. That's EYAL@urm.academy. There's no .com on that. It's exactly the way I spelled it. And use the subject line, Answer Me EYAL. All right, let's get on with it. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the URM Podcast. My guest today is Craggs, who's a producer, mix engineer, and studio owner out of Hidden Track Studios in Folkestone, England. He's been working in the industry for nearly 2 decades and has worked with a plethora of bands and labels, including Neck Deep, Mallory Knox, Gallows, and a ton more. This is a really good conversation. I introduce you, Craggs. Welcome to the URM Podcast.
Hey, Al. Thanks for having me. It's been a real honor to be invited on.
Thanks for being here. I want to just get right into something that you mentioned on the pre-interview that I thought was interesting. You said that you don't think that you have innate talent like a lot of the people out there, but I think there's something to be said about the innate drive to work really hard. I don't think that everybody just has that. The drive to succeed and the drive to actually do what's necessary is kind of as rare as what people would call talent. And so what I'm curious is, what was your average day like when you were first starting out trying to turn this into something compared to a current day for you?
Okay, that's a good question. I started kind of recording in a studio in my hometown where I grew up. It was on the back of a music shop, so every so often there would be like a recording session that would just usually be a vocal over a backing track, kind of someone singing along to a cover or something like that. So those days were mainly spent selling guitars and making coffee. But when I went self-employed and I first started kind of going out on my own and had like a small home studio in my parents' garage, my average day when I first started there would be, I actually had a kind of side hustle of cleaning a leisure centre, which is like a swimming pool and a gym near me, because obviously, in the first year of trading, you don't have enough bands to kind of really make a lot of money. So I used to have like a few side hustles, and one of them would be going to do that. So I'd actually get up pretty early and go out to this place and clean toilets and showers before I'd come back and start a session if I had a session. But then sometimes it would be just doing vinyl transfers to digital. It was like in the CD era that I was started, so I was kind of transferring vinyls to CDs or mini discs. So yeah, and then occasionally, every so often or progressively more and more, I was getting like local bands in as well.
That's quite a difference in the side hustle from the main gig.
Yeah.
However, those are some applicable skills. Cleaning toilets actually translates into studio life, especially if you intern for somebody.
It's funny, because at the start of this kind of COVID era, my the cleaner that I had for my studio stopped coming in because obviously for obvious reasons, but also he had some other things going on. So I've actually had to double down on my cleaning skills once again for the first time in a while. So I'm back to cleaning my own studio. It feels like the good old times.
Yeah, full circle.
Yeah.
So how many hours would your day typically be?
It's so hard to remember because obviously it's such a long time back now, but I just remember spending a lot of time. If I wasn't with a band or doing, making money elsewhere, it was a lot of time spent on MySpace, kind of like drumming up business or kind of going to local gigs. So it was a lot of hustling back then, a lot of, trying to find kind of people to work with and that kind of thing. So yeah, I've always definitely put the hours in. Definitely not scared of long days.
How does it compare to now?
I think I probably put more hours in now, to be honest. I think I've got a bit of a kind of, I think you build up a weird tolerance to working long days. And I think obviously the clients I work with now are obviously kind of a bit more advanced or a bit more successful than maybe the ones that I did when I first started. So deadlines become a real thing. And, when you have lots of people needing, revisions or stems or mixes done on time, you have to be prepared to put in a lot of hours just to kind of make sure you're keeping everyone happy, really.
This is why when interns are sometimes tested by potential employers or anyone is tested, there will be some tough situations thrown at them, like real quick deadlines, situations that involve very little sleep, things that will generally stretch them to their limits. And the idea is to see, are they going to crack? Can they handle this? Because if they can't handle this, there's absolutely no way that they're cut out for doing this for real. Because contrary to what a lot of people may think, the more successful you get, the busier you get and the higher the pressure is. It's not like you become successful and can work less. I mean, there comes a point where you can have more balance once you have enough momentum going, but the amount of work only goes up. The amount of pressure only goes up. And so if someone can't hang with that kind of stuff at the very, very beginning, it's a really, really good indicator that not going to work.
Yeah, agreed. And it's funny, because there's so many facets of recording, producing, mixing that I think get overlooked when people kind of start off or kind of are interested in getting a career in this. They think either they're kind of attracted to the technical or the engineering side of things and the toys and the plugins and software, or they're attracted to, just the idea of working in music. But there's just so many other sides of it, the people skills, people management and time management and being prepared to just put in an awful lot of hours and dealing with a lot of pressure and problem solving, I think, as well. I think the majority of, this job as a producer certainly is problem solving.
I actually think that I've said this before. I think that in order to be a great mixer or a great producer, you have to be a great problem solver. And I've had some people react badly to that, saying that to say that takes away the art side of things, but I don't think it does. You can't create a complex piece of art without solving problems.
Exactly. And certainly in my experience, I mean, especially now with most of the songs I work on, the minimum, again, short of a kind of maybe a kind of a one-off of like an acoustic song on a record or something like that, the average song has 80 to 200 tracks. And there is no way you can mix 80 to 200 tracks of audio without problem solving. I don't know anyone that can filter down or, kind of funnel down that much sound into a listenable mix without making compromises, figuring out things. So I think even just on the basic level of mixing, I think problem solving is huge. But then when you're producing as well, things like, even just stuff like, this week for me, I'm dealing with talking to a band that I'm doing a record with coming up, and there's kind of scheduling issues with certain members having to do certain things. So, you're problem solving on multiple projects at multiple times, at the same time, and multiple issues at the same time. So I think being a good problem solver is, I would absolutely agree with you. I think it's a huge part of doing this.
Yeah. Well, that's why this is actually so hard to do, in my opinion, is because you have to marry an artistic vision with a pretty sophisticated technical know-how. And oftentimes those types of things don't go together, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like oftentimes it's one or the other. I mean, a guitar can have a very technical approach if you want, but at the end of the day, you're still playing stuff that feels cool. That's kind of what it all boils down to at the very, very end of everything with, playing an instrument or painting. You're making something that looks cool. You're kind of creating something out of thin air, but you're not fucking with a bunch of parameters and technology in the same way, in my opinion, because it just comes down to a physical act. When it comes to something like mixing and production, yeah, you are creating something out of thin air, but you have to manipulate very complex equipment and tons of moving pieces, so many moving pieces along the way to get it to not sound, first of all, like a total piece of garbage, and then beyond that, actually sound like something that people might enjoy. That's craziness.
Yeah, and I think it's funny as I kind of continue to improve and learn more and hopefully, get better at my craft, the understanding of the minutiae of, you kind of learn, you can see the problems coming much further off in the distance. So, when you see, kind of even arrangement wise, there's synths here, but there's also guitars and there's rhythm guitars and then there's clean underlay guitars and there's lead guitars, there's screaming and then there's singing, and it's all happening at once. You can kind of just hear instantly that that's going to be problematic to some degree because there's not going to be one, just clear, distinctive front voice. So I think the better you get at doing this, you start to see the problems further away. But similarly, as a producer, it's then you have to kind of try and convey that and feed that information back to the band without sounding like you're being dismissive of their art as well. So it can be a challenging kind of thing to kind of parlay this knowledge that you've learned and the kind of wider understanding of how the nuts and bolts of a mix could go together, but not sound like you're dismissing someone's raw art.
Yeah, I agree. Well, the problem, in my opinion, is that someone who doesn't understand mixing, they might not understand why something is difficult or may not work because they're just hearing, they've got a sonic vision in their head, but that sonic vision in somebody's head isn't limited by a physical medium like a speaker that has to recreate it and somehow fit everything in and work in a certain phase with another speaker. Like there are physical constraints to actually being able to reproduce these sounds, but in your head, when you're imagining something, there's no physical constraints.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really, really hard for someone who doesn't actually understand how to mix. It's hard for them to get that, I think, because they'll hear some mix by somebody else where they think they're hearing certain things and they'll have a sonic vision, and then they will assume that you can just do that with theirs.
Exactly, yeah, and this is the thing. I mean, I think it's a funny one because I was talking to someone recently about kind of, I think a friend or someone that isn't in the industry just was asking me, as you've done this longer and got better, or supposedly got better, do you mix quicker? And I've said no, I mix slower. Like I'm getting slower and slower, which is strange. But the problem is that as my ears develop and as I understand the mechanics of a mix so much better, you hear so many more things wrong with it, I guess, because your ears are becoming educated and kind of trained to kind of spot these clashes so much better. But as I said, it's hard sometimes. Again, I think it's a real kind of a skill that I constantly trying to keep working on, is that understanding that while it's so obvious to me or you or plenty of other people listening to this, that when you hear a clashing part or there's two guitar parts sitting in the same range or register and then there's a vocal there as well, and then people are wondering why you can only hear the vocal or the lead guitar isn't cutting through as much. It's kind of obvious to us because we've done it so many times, but it's hard to remember that, like you said, these bands, that it's the vision in their head. They don't have that experience or technical skill to even understand why. So the job or the skill then becomes how you communicate that issue, and without sounding, dismissive or rude or like a bit of a douche, when you're telling them that it isn't going to work,
Bit of a douche or a total douche.
I mean, yeah, I've probably been called worse,
Oh yeah, I've definitely been called worse, and also funny you say that. When I think back to how I've handled certain things in the past, I cringe from how much of an asshole I've been, and versus how I would handle certain things now. And so I definitely think that the ability to deal with other people and to have to, A, disappoint them or B, get them to rethink their vision, or C, get them to compromise part of their vision. There's a way to do it where people can be reasonably or very happy. Maybe not always, but I think in most cases there's an art to it and a skill to it, and it's something that you can develop over time. And it's actually one of the harder parts of this whole job, maybe the hardest part.
I agree, and I think it's dynamic as well, because no man is an island and all of that as well. We're human beings too, and we might have had too little sleep or not enough caffeine one day, or something else going on in our life, and our communication skills might not be on their top form, and then that's going to just affect that conversation or how that conversation will go down. So it is, like you said, it's such a critical part of the job that is so easily overlooked. But the more longer I've done this for, and the more bands I've worked with, you also learn how to kind of read the room and pick up on what the vibe is with different people, and how you can communicate with one person in the room is different to how you can communicate with someone else. And you get a lot quicker at like reading that situation and knowing when to make a joke, or when to not say anything at all, or when to let the band kind of hash this idea out between themselves before your job as a producer at that point is to stay quiet. I think it's that is just like you said, it's a skill that you have to learn from just doing a lot of hours of doing it, and upsetting people and apologizing and working out why you upset them and try to learn from it, I guess.
Yeah. How did you learn it? Did you learn it the way you just said, just by doing it a lot? Or did you put some thought into it? The reason I'm asking is because, for instance, I know that Chris Crummett studied psychology in college and suggests that for people who go into this line of work. He suggests that you just go ahead and read books on psychology so that you know a little bit more about it. So you have at least a few reference points and ideas on how to deal with extreme personalities and conflict resolution.
That's great advice. Yeah, I mean, for my self-deprecating in the pre-interview about not having innate talent, which I stand by, I do mean that, but I do have some kind of skills, and I think I've always been fairly good as a fairly extroverted person. I like meeting people, I like talking to people, and enjoy conversing in general. So I think kind of communication has never been a struggle for me, but like anything, you develop skills and you do things. And I tend to find as well that it seems kind of obvious to, but I'm sure it'll ring true for you and you'll understand what I mean, is that I think if people understand that you're coming at it from a place that you care about their song and you really give a shit about how it sounds, and that is why you're kind of essentially causing this upset, because ultimately you feel it's worth that upset to make the product better or to make their song better. That is a good starting point, I think, for people to realise that you're not just being a kind of contrarian in the situation. So that's kind of a big thing for me. I try not to use any negative language. It's, rather than saying something's not good, you would say something can be better, And I think, obviously, that's a very basic example, but I think that's a good kind of blueprint of just generally how I approach it, is just to explain to people, look, if I didn't care, I wouldn't say anything. I just sit here, press record and take my money. But I do care. So that's why we're having this conversation.
Man, that idea of telling people that something just totally sucked, I think that some people will say that they're okay with it. In my experience, not that many people are actually okay with that. And even if they say that they're okay with it in the moment, there will be some resentment that builds over time and a gradual chipping away of your bond, your working bond. If you use that kind of language and take that kind of approach with people, you could end up making a great record or many great records and just never have your clients come back to you. Like, I know of a few producers who are pretty heavy hitters who are notorious douchebag, tyrant pieces of shit in the way that they deal with people. And their career is a series of first records with a band. And those records sometimes do really well, which is why they get other clients, but the bands never go back to them. And it has everything to do with how they're treated. And what I think is interesting about that is that no amount of success on a record will get a band to go back to a producer that they had a bad experience with personally. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I can really see that as well. And I think there's a few interesting things you said about, like, you know, just telling someone that it sucked. The only time I'd ever say anything as kind of blunt and aggressive as that is if I had such a good bond with the band that they knew that I was making a joke, because I would never say that seriously to a band. That's just not the language I use in the studio. But just a kind of nuanced point on that, really, that I have a theory about, and it might be, you know, be interested to see if you agree, or, you know, what your reaction is to it. But I will tailor the kind of language I use and also the pace I'm working at, you know, how enthusiastic or how animated I am to the instrument as well. Because I think different performers and different musicians playing different instruments require a different type of kind of interaction. So with vocals and drums, it's a very similar kind of process for me, which is I'm doing as few takes as I possibly can, and it is high energy, high octane. I don't use any, there will never be, you know, not good or bad or sucked, or there will be no negative language. And usually if I do have other band members here specifically for vocals, they will be told in no uncertain terms that they will not speak to the singer while we're working on a track. And if the singer asks for their input, all they will say is, "It sounds fucking great." That's all the band are allowed to say to a singer when I'm working with them. Because, you know, then, you know, I'll say to them, look, various points through the song, my hands are not going to be on the talkback mic. I will turn around and say to you, is there anything in here you want me just to go over? And that's the process. So the band will be like, if the singer quite often will go, oh, what do the boys think in the back? You know, what do the guys think? They put the talkback on for them. They go, yeah, it's fucking great, man. You're killing it. And then they say to me, he's got the wrong lyrics in that second line on the verse. Okay, cool. And I'll just say to them, rather than saying, you got the wrong lyrics, I'm like, it's perfect, it's sounding great. I wouldn't mind just one more hit at that first verse. Oh, can you just read me the lyrics quickly? And then they'll go, oh, I think I might have sung the wrong lyrics there. Oh, okay, cool, we'll just have one more go at it. You know, there's so many ways of kind of communicating, but I think vocals is so critical, and drums as well, because it's such a physical, it's a performance. You can't fake drums or vocals. It is literally a performance, just like it is on stage. There's no difference. With guitar, when you're on stage, it's, you know, you're in the power stance and you know, you're head banging and it's loud. On the studio, you're usually sat on a comfy chair with a drink next to you, you know, punching in parts. It's so different, I think, that, you know, with vocals and drums, I really kind of make sure that the communication and the energy is right for the person, you know. I think it's really, really critical.
What's interesting here to me is what's always been difficult about this, and I agree with you completely, because that's the approach that I just try to take in life as well, which is tailoring your communication style, not purpose, but style, to the situation. Different people are going to react to different types of communication differently, and you have to keep in mind what the outcome is and what state of mind they need to be in to perform their best. Now, this has been tough for me because I've always been hyper aware of these kinds of communication techniques. And so when someone is using them on me, it's super, super obvious. Like if, just say I was the vocalist and someone said, could you read me back the lyric? I'd be thinking, he's saying I fucked up the lyrics. It would just be real clear to me.
Sure.
But I have come to realize over the years, and this might sound super obvious, but it's really important, that not everybody is wired the same. And just because I would take something a certain way or feel a certain way about a communication style doesn't mean that everybody else would. And in fact, most people on earth don't think the way I think. So to assume that they think the way I think is erroneous. And I shouldn't communicate with them from the standpoint of thinking that they're just going to understand things the way I do or interpret things the way I do. They're going to interpret things their way and understand things their way. And it's on me to meet them where they're at, not try to pull them over to where I am and just be like, what's the problem? The fucking lyrics are wrong. Just tell them the lyrics are wrong. Just get them right. Like, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
Yeah. That, no good. You can't do that.
No, I mean, and that's it. And I think not only communication, it also shows that maybe you've probably got a very, very good sense of self, and probably, if you were the vocalist in that situation, you were like, listen, I'd just rather you just say to me, you fucked up the lyrics. Someone would have to be so kind of confident in themselves and comfortable in themselves to do that. And I'm sure you've worked with enough singers as well as I do, that singers don't generally tend to fit that bill.
Nope.
Especially in the studio, they're generally the most fragile people, and that sounds like I'm being derogatory, but I mean, their skill is that they can emote. So by virtue of that, they are emotional people. So you have to be more forgiving, I think, in general. But I completely take your point that, I might be treading too lightly around certain people, and they're just like, it's all right, Oz, just rip the Band-Aid off, let's go. So it does happen. But I generally would rather kind of go the softly approach,
I think that's way better. I think that people with blunt communication styles will let that be known up front. Like, you'll be able to tell.
Yeah.
They'll make it pretty clear, because I know I do to people. It's important also to just understand what that musician is going through, right? So with a vocalist, you're right. Their thing is they need to be able to emote. If you break that down for them, they're not going to be able to get there, kind of like an actor or something. And also the fact that their physical body is the instrument, and the mind-body link is just so strong. You can't be taking shots at the way that they're feeling. You have to keep it all in that flow that keeps them in as close to a peak state as possible.
That's exactly, what I think too. And what is really interesting is talking to other producers, as you kind of go through this career, you kind of make friends and you meet people, and, and it's so interesting that people have, a lot of people have very different takes on this and approaches to dealing with this kind of part of the job of, like, getting the best out of people and not kind of destroying someone's confidence while simultaneously telling them they need to change something. So it's really interesting that just there's so many different approaches, and there are definitely people out there that would strongly disagree with me and kind of get the best by essentially breaking the person down, but for me personally, I've just found time and time again that in my experience, being someone's biggest fan primarily, while with tracking vocals, I am that singer's biggest fan, and I'll be enthusiastic, and my phone won't be in my hand. It will be, I'll be all in on their vocal and just telling them every bit that they did well, they'll know about it. And I'll never say, oh, you fucked that line up. I'd say, you smashed that line there. That is so good. Oh my God, that's the best you've sung that line. Killer, keep going. I definitely come as like a cheerleader, especially with vocals. But, again, now that might not work for some people. It might be that, I've worked with bands and taken that approach, and they've just like, they find it irritating or they find it disingenuous. And, they ultimately settle up with someone that's maybe a bit more casual, or, kind of a bit more of the kind of traditional British kind of understated stiff upper lip approach, which is usually just someone going, yeah, that's all right, that's all you'll get. That's the usual British way, so I'm definitely aware it's not for everyone, but just in my, and it makes me feel good, because if I'm like amping myself up and I'm amping them up, it's like everyone's having more fun, and I think when everyone's having fun, generally the results are better as well.
I think so too, and it's a very tough thing to quantify, because there's no metric, there's no fun quotient, You can't dial in the number of fun points, but it works. It works. Well, you know what, though? There are some classic records, like, those Korn records where you see the home videos and doesn't look like they're having fun. Looks like they're going through a very painful experience, and those are great too. But so I would say that it's more than just fun. When people are in the zone, they do a much better job, whatever zone that is. And the thing is that having a good time, a fun time, gets you closer to it in lots of ways. So I definitely think that there's something to that. And for most cases, you don't need someone to relive a trauma in order to do something really, really great. Like, when you're tracking a drummer or a guitar player or a bassist or whatever, or most vocals in most songs, you don't need them to go back to some place where they're reliving some horrific event. But even if that's what you have to do, still, the point is everyone's got to be in that zone.
Yeah, I definitely. I suppose with the fun thing, I was being selfishly more talking about myself, because if I'm enjoying the process more, I guess, and feeling like I'm invested and I'm amped up on it, then I come into the studio every day like super pumped about what we're doing. Like, I just tend to find that if I was a bit more nonchalant, that would affect me and my kind of belief or my enthusiasm to the project. But no, I completely agree, and it's funny, because there's definitely, say I'm working with a band and there's, a song that's clearly, a sad song where the singer's singing about something traumatic or kind of heartbreaking for them. I will kind of make sure that, again, it's the producer's job to make sure that you're setting up an energy or an environment that emotion can be conveyed and can present itself. But I think the link between kind of amping someone up or being like, fuck yeah, it's amazing, versus kind of giving someone a space where they can be vulnerable is by being completely focused in on it and dialed into it and enthusiastic, but not necessarily in a loud way, but just kind of being very present with the vocalist. And I think that is something that, you can kind of parlay into different things.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you get yourself there when it's a topic you can't relate to?
I would say most projects I do, I'll have a conversation with the singer about what the song's about, especially if I've caught kind of like, the odd lyric, because I'd say, the majority of what I do is, half singing or mostly singing. I'd say probably a smaller proportion of the stuff I work on is all screaming, where, I think with screaming, the lyrics sometimes are super important, but generally it's more the emotion behind the lyric in the scream that's like the important aspect. But I think with singing, there's so much of it that the lyric really kind of is important. So quite often I'll have a conversation with a singer before we start the song and just say, oh, what's it about? Or if I've worked with a band before, that usually they're quite excited to have that conversation with me, so they'll preempt it and say, oh, Oz, check this out, this is what this song's about, so they'll kind of be quite excited to kind of talk it through with me. So just by having a conversation as we're starting the song puts them into a headspace. And then again, if it was like I'm wanting to kind of give examples, but I'm also aware that I don't want to kind of out anyone, because there's been some awesome experiences, but I'll kind of tread lightly around this. But there was an example where I worked with a band where it was the first time I'd worked with a band, and kind of, as I'm kind of making small talk with them as we're doing whatever, asking them, do you guys have girlfriends, your relationships, what's the deal? Having those kind of conversations. And the singer kind of threw away quite quickly, oh, I was actually married, but I'm not anymore. But it was really a kind of nonchalant way. So roll on 4 days later, we start tracking the vocals.
Was it like, oh, I better pay attention to this?
Yeah, exactly. It's something that kind of pricked my ear a little bit, but you don't push on it. But 4 days later, we start tracking vocals on a song, and the lyrics are so obviously about this, and the room goes silent, and everyone's realizing that this is a moment. And the singer is singing this take with literally tears rolling down his face. It's like you can hear his voice cracking throughout the song, and he made it to like the second chorus and then just broke down. And that was the take we used on the actual thing. Up to those two verses, they're the actual performance that's used in the final mix, because there was something so powerful about it. Had I not maybe had that conversation, just pure small talk, throwaway conversation, just to kind of build a bit of rapport between me and the band who I've never met before, I would not have picked up on that. So I think it's just being aware of that.
I'd say not just the fact that you had the conversation, but you had the conversation and also were able to key in on that detail.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's it. As I said, it's those little details of just those little kind of tricks of kind of being present or, paying attention to people. I really do think that that's kind of what's helped me kind of keep me doing this job and keep, bands coming back or people wanting to work with me. I think that's probably a bigger facet than the guitar tone I get a band or the kick drum sound,
Well, the things that people tell you have so much meaning to them that they don't necessarily understand that they're conveying. And if you are really paying attention to everything, the tone of their voice, the tempo at which they're speaking, what the context is, what the other things that they were saying around it were, the vibe of how they said it, their facial expression, all those things. If you're actually paying attention, you can figure out everything or just about everything you need to know from just a few sentences, but you have to be actually listening and You have to actually give a shit about what the person is saying. Actually care.
Yeah. And I think that's, again, it's probably the ability to listen is, I've found something that maybe it's got better with age. I don't know if you would agree with that or not. I've found that I want to listen more now, whereas maybe in my 20s, when I was a bit younger, I was a bit more bullish and, you just kind of, you'd ask questions more for a formality or for a politeness thing. But, now I think you get a bit older and you get a bit kind of more life experience. And I think you do care about the answer and you're more interested in other people's stories, I guess.
You said that you feel like it gets better with age, and I agree with you. However, if I'm thinking about my own life, that's something that I think I've always been pretty good at, which is understanding what other people are saying and understanding what's beneath the surface. I've been able to use those cues to make decisions throughout my entire life, and it's served me very, very well. But it's something that I didn't have to use to think about. I still kind of don't if I don't want to. I just understand things. Like when people are saying something and they're being disingenuous, or they're saying something and it means something else that they may not know they mean, or they're unhappy, but they don't know they're unhappy. All those types of things that are super important, that's always just come to me. Like it's always just like I could just read it like a book.
Sure.
Now, the thing that's changed over the years is that rather than just taking those impressions and then running with my interpretation of them, which is what I would do in the past, is, just log the info and keep going. Now I actively try to engage people so that, because first of all, I wasn't always right. I was right a lot of the time, but not always. Your intuition's not always going to be dead on. So I want to eliminate misreading of other people. And B, it's much more effective when you actually engage somebody on these things. You can learn a lot more about where they're coming from, and it's a lot easier to get to a joint solution on things. I guess what I used to do is take that info and just do my thing. Just take how I figured they were feeling or what direction I figured they were going in, and then just acted on it. Now I try to involve people in things and try to make it a collaborative type of situation. So I put a lot more work into it now. So it's gotten better with age, but I also work on it a lot more.
Yeah, and it becomes more of like an active process as opposed to a kind of innate kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think like you said, but potentially you might be an outlier or someone that's gifted with a very intuitive communication skill. One thing I've noticed, I think maybe I've just become more aware of as I've got older, and then maybe because I became aware of it in other people, I've then thought, I don't want to do that because I don't like that when people, I notice it's a trait that I see in other people that I don't enjoy, which is that a conversation becomes just someone's chance to say their part as opposed to, actually listening. So, I'm sure everyone can be guilty of that. God knows I definitely will have been or, will continue to be on some level. But it's just something that I've become. So when I say I've got better with age, I think it's become, maybe I've become more aware of these things and had more life experience myself. So when someone talks about a situation or losing, death or, relationships, I can relate maybe on a kind of one-to-one, level, because now I, as someone who's had a few more years of experience to when I was in my 20s, I've kind of had that experience and can relate, and therefore maybe put myself, or I can empathize easier, I guess.
Absolutely. And also when it's certain things, like I could tell someone's not happy with the situation. Like say that you're tracking a band and you just know something's off. They're not happy about something. In the past, like I'm talking about like my early 20s, I would have sensed it and I would have been right, but I would have then just acted on it either badly or well. That depends. But I would have just acted on it, or I would have just assumed it's done for. Like they've decided they want to leave, or, just come to conclusions that you shouldn't come to. What I should have done is taken that intuition. Okay, they're not happy. Let's engage them and figure out why, and then try to fix that. The same thing applies in relationships with a significant other. I think that you can feel that someone's unhappy with something. That happens in every relationship at some point. Now, are you going to take that cue and flip the fuck out and torpedo things, or are you going to talk it out and keep things going? It's an important thing to not just take these cues, but then know what to do with them afterwards. That's been the thing.
Yeah. And I think like further on than that as well, the next part of that kind of that chain of thinking in my head is that it's taking action into kind of how you respond to that intuition that that say that the room isn't happy. But then the next thing is how do you respond? Because I don't know about you, but like, in a studio, there's sometimes things get tense and it's not often obvious why things are getting tense, but sometimes there's an environment where, it could be that the major songwriter is a guitarist and the second guitarist is doing his parts and the songwriter is sitting there going, I'm not happy with how he's playing it. So there's all these like kind of like micro tensions in the room. And sometimes and I'm not advocating this as a rule of thumb, but just in certain situations, you can break that just by literally being an idiot or telling a joke or talking about a meme, like you can break a tension quite easily, or you can address it like, head on and say, I'm sensing that people aren't happy. What's going on? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it's that, like you said, so beyond that kind of like knowing that you are going to respond or kind of call it out is how you do it. Because I think there's so many ways to skin that cat as well,
Well, yeah, you could just attack somebody on it, or you could address them bluntly, or you could change their state, or you can figure out more clearly who the problem is coming from and deal with them only. There's so many different ways to go about it. And I think that actually how you do it is just as important as the fact that you're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few of these like kind of microaggressions or micro tensions in a session that my starting point is to deal with it with a bit of humor and then build from there. Because if nothing else, it changes my state, because if something's kind of, I'm sensing tension or, someone maybe like distrust or some kind of objection to me or what I'm doing or something that someone's displeased, it's easy for my ego to take that as an attack and then for me to get defensive back. And then we're in a kind of battle of defensiveness. So if I make a silly, like kind of play it off and be silly, not only does that sometimes break the tension, but it also it changes my state into something that's kind of like, I've not kind of like tit for tatting them with aggression or kind of, defensive energy, I guess.
Yeah, getting our own ego out of the way is so crucial. That's, again, you asked about the getting better with age, or you mentioned the getting better with age. That's also a big part of what has gotten better with age. Is I feel like, at least for me, tell me if it's the same for you, the ego voice was a lot louder. It's not that it's not there now. I just have figured out how to defer its gratification.
I like that.
Yeah, rather than going for the kill immediately, like that tit for tat defensive thing. Like, I'm going to satisfy my ego now by winning this battle. Boom. Drop an atom bomb on this person's psyche and destroy it. No. Never. I don't do that shit anymore. Now, I feel like the bigger ego gratification is by solving the problem and continuing a good thing. Keep a good thing going and fixing whatever that is. But I think that initial super strong ego voice, the fight voice or whatever it is, that was a lot stronger when I was younger, for sure. That's not to say I don't have it. I'm just able to control it better. I think that's maturity. What about you?
Yeah, I'm sitting here kind of trying to work out if I feel like that's how it is for me. I think I suppose it's definitely something that I'm aware of and become more aware of. The distinction I make is that maybe when I was kind of clapping back more younger, as opposed to it being a real ego, it was maybe more an insecurity. If someone was kind of challenging my knowledge or authority in a situation, I would take that more as I would feel insecure about that and be like defensive because I'm actually secretly insecure about, do I have a right to have a place of authority in this session? Whereas now I probably have more of an ego in some ways because I think I've earned self-belief and I've earned trust in my resolve or trust in my opinion much more than I did when I was, starting out.
I would say you have a more secure ego, not bigger.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I think maybe it affects me less, but I still think if someone kind of was to kind of challenge me on my kind of position of, as a producer, you kind of have to be a position of authority because if you don't, the session's going nowhere. Before that would be masked with insecurity. I think now it is a genuine belief in myself, but then try not to come across like a dick, because I always try and say to people, just because I have an opinion doesn't mean I'm right, so you just have to try and balance it.
That's a good way to put it.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying this podcast, then you should know that it's brought to you by URM Academy. URM Academy's mission is to create the next generation of audio professionals by giving them the inspiration and information to hone their craft and build a career doing what they love. You've probably heard me talk about Nail the Mix before, and if you're a member, you already know how amazing it is. At the beginning of the month, Nail the Mix members get the raw multi-tracks to a new song by artists like Lamb of God, Angels and Airwaves, Knock Loose, Opeth, Meshuggah, Bring Me the Horizon, Gojira, Asking Alexandria, Machine Head, and Papa Roach, among many, many others. Over 60 at this point. Then at the end of the month, the producer who mixed it comes on and does a live streaming walkthrough of exactly how they mix the song on the album and takes your questions live on air. And these are guys like TLA, Will Putney, Jens Bogren, Dan Lancaster, Tui Madsen, Andrew Wade, and many, many more. You'll also get access to MixLab, which is our collection of dozens of bite-sized mixing tutorials that cover all the basics, as well as Portfolio Builder, which is a library of pro-quality multi-tracks cleared for use in your portfolio so your career will never again be held back by the quality of your source material. And for those of you who really want to step up their game, we have another membership tier called URM Enhance, which includes everything I already told you about and access to our massive library of fast tracks, which are deep, super detailed courses on intermediate and advanced topics like gain staging, mastering, low end, and so forth. It's over 500 hours of content, and man, let me tell you, this stuff is just insanely detailed. Enhanced members also get access to one-on-ones, which are basically office hour sessions with us, and Mix Rescue, which is where we open up one of your mixes and fix it up and talk you through exactly what we're doing at every step. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, if you're ready to level up your mixing skills in your audio career, head over to urm.academy to find out more.
How do you balance the idea of being the authority figure, which is really important, actually? You're totally right that if there isn't a leader, everything goes to shit. I mean, that's what you're hired for. And even if it's a band that just wants you to re-record parts that they already totally wrote and just make them sound better versus a band that wants you to like help rewrite everything and be like, the sixth member or whatever, no matter what you're hired to do, no matter what the scope of the project is, you're being hired to be a leader. And therefore, they're giving you authority over the project, and how you go about exercising that authority has a lot to do with how things are going to turn out, both in terms of your interpersonal relationship with these people and the end product. And so what I'm curious is, how do you go about balancing being buddies with being the boss? Understanding that ultimately they're the boss because they're paying. Still, within the confines of the session itself, you're kind of the boss.
Yeah, I make sure that that is implied or known. To be frank, I think it's really important. And again, just basing off, the time spent in the studio and learning that, and having worked with bands that I feel intimidated by or, feeling like, secretly like, oh, am I good enough to have a position of authority in this session? This band is so good. Or I feel like, that I'm not worthy of, taking control. So then you don't take control and you become a passive person and you're kind of asking for forgiveness or, asking to be told. And instantly in that role, you can feel the band lose trust in you. And then they start kind of maybe not being happy with what you're doing. So definitely over time, I've learned that, like, for me, it's better to kind of, just say to people, listen, like, you guys will always have the final say on things. Always. And if you tell me that you want to put a flanger over the whole mix, I'll tell you you're crazy, but I'll still do it. If you're going to pay me to do it, I'll do it. But I always say to people, like, if I make a suggestion and like it's kind of shot down without even it being discussed or tried, you're really wasting your money and your time working with me. Because the whole point, that the fact that you're coming to me and not just doing it yourselves, is the fact I've recorded a lot of songs, and hopefully you're here because you've liked one of those previous recordings. To kind of dismiss any ideas without trying, I think is a wasted opportunity. However, if you try it and tell me you think it's shit, I'm not going to be offended at that point. I'm going to just smile, say cool, and then we move on, and it's not going to, it's going to be like water off a duck's back. But if you kind of dismissively say, no to something without even kind of really hearing it through or like listening to the point, then the chances of me kind of saying, oh, hang on a minute, you're here for a reason, that's more likely to happen.
And I'm sure it goes both ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When they have an idea, I'm sure that you're going to at least try to hear them out.
100%. And also all the members as well, because I think that's another thing of like earning trust as well, is I think it's easy, and, I've listened to plenty of producers talk on this, or, engineers talk on this subject of, it's pretty clear that there's like always a hierarchy of like kind of dominance in a band. And I think the easiest thing to take as a producer, that you're kind of being ingratiated into this kind of new group very quickly and establishing yourself within hours of meeting these people, is to kind of side with the authority figure and work downwards. But what I've tried to do more is kind of actually kind of bring everyone else up to that level, and kind of try and reinforce the idea that, everyone should have an equal voice, or if not equal, have a voice, have an opinion. Everyone's opinion's welcome. But the only kind of time that I think maybe that is limited is time. If time becomes a factor and people get too kind of involved, and and everyone's got an opinion on every vocal harmony, you're never going to finish things on time. So at that point, I'll say to people, listen, we're running low on time, so if people want to make a suggestion, I'm all ears, I'm totally open for it, but it has to be a hill you're willing to die on. If it's something that is just a throwaway idea, maybe don't, just if you're making a suggestion and throwing it in, just make sure it's something that you feel really strongly about, if we're running low on time. But other than that, I kind of want to hear everyone's idea, really.
Yeah. Well, this is not something that musicians are known to be good at, which is staying on task and only focusing on the most important ideas. Their job is to be creative, so they're just going to throw things at you. You need to understand, as a producer, in my opinion, which are the important things to focus on given the actual physical parameters of the session. Like that deadline, for all intents and purposes, is a physical wall that you're going to hit. I mean, yeah, you can extend it sometimes, but it's pretty much like a physical wall. It's a bookend. Whatever happens has to happen before that. And it needs to happen well enough before that you can do all the other things that matter as well before that wall, before you smack into it.
Yeah.
Creativity, I have noticed, like intense creativity and the ability to understand time constraints don't always go hand in hand. And so that is part of your role as an authority, is to understand how to manage that upcoming end to the activities, with having people feel like their voices are being listened to, but also making sure that all the important stuff is happening. So at the end of the day, what they're actually there for, which is a finished piece of work, happens. That matters way more than their individual ideas along the way.
I think what you've just said literally is the critical mass of recording a band. For me personally, that like you've literally just surmised for me exactly the job of a producer. Very, very like articulated well, because
cool. Well, I'll send you an invoice after this.
Yeah, I'll just sound clip that, and just make a little sound clip of that, and then if anyone ever asks me what I do for a living, then just play them that. And it's funny, because how many conversations, I mean, obviously not you, because, you have these conversations every day, it's what you do, but if you're talking to bands, or bands talking to bands, other artists, I think that what you've just surmised there is like the critical mass of a producer is just, it's just not seen. I don't think bands on bands really understand or are cognizant of that kind of part of it. They think it's about microphones or, I don't know, studios. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Dude, I can tell you this from the companies too, that when I have to deal with, which is all the time, with producers and musicians, both at Riff Hard and URM, which is what we do. This is an actual issue we have to deal with all the time because we have to get these projects done. There's no way around that. And I've seen the same thing from this angle as well as when I was producing from that angle. I think that when you're in the position of being the creative person, your project management skills just aren't going to be as strong. Someone has to be the project manager. Yeah, someone has to be able to think, we got to stay on track. Like, we can't be worried about this idea right now. And then also not do it in a way that alienates everybody.
Yeah, and just sounds dismissive.
Yeah, exactly, which is tough, man. It's actually really, really tough. Sometimes those ideas are crucial. That's the thing that's scary about it is you don't want to be tossing the really great ideas that are going to make the big difference. So you can't just approach it like you're a Terminator or something. Just stay on target. Like you cannot approach it like that. You actually do need to listen to these ideas because one of these ideas that might take you off track at first might solve a bunch of problems that are going to reveal themselves down the line, or might be the thing that makes it no longer a B plus, but an A plus. Like there's ideas that are transformative.
Yeah.
And
agreed,
so you need to be ready to jump on those too. It's tough.
Yeah, definitely. In those situations, like one thing that I try and do is I think I'm pretty good at kind of maybe visualizing or like kind of hearing the song in my head or like playing an idea through. So if someone was to suggest something, sometimes I might just not give a response straight away and just play the idea in my head and go, that could be really cool actually. Yeah, let's give that a go. But even if I think that wouldn't work, I might be honest with a band and go, oh, I'm not actually sure on that, but hey, let's give it a go. Let's try it out and see what happens. And, and it's not uncommon for you to go, oh, do you know what? I wasn't sure on that, but hearing it now sounds amazing. Good shout, But like you said, it's also you're balancing that against, okay, we're running very low on time. So, sometimes I'll kind of just mention that, say, I'm conscious that we're running low on time, but I'm up for giving it a go. Or saying, just kind of addressing the fact that, people are aware that every time a suggestion is made that there might be ramifications on deadlines or schedules.
Yeah. I mean, what's funny is you say that they might be aware, but I think that sometimes you have to run with it, even understanding that no matter how many times you say that, they're not going to understand the deadline the way you do.
Yeah. And I think certain artists and certain bands more than others as well. I think it's a sliding scale, isn't it? I think,
It's a sliding scale, but I think that I'm convinced that this is wired into people's brains. The reason I say this, and I'm taking leaps, is because I know that the part of your brain that is able to calculate long-term consequences is something that happens when you're about 25, like that final part of your brain finally grows in, I guess. The younger you are, the less you're able to actually understand the true meaning of a long-term impact or a long-term consequence, which is why teenagers or people in their early 20s are, when they think of, oh, that's not going to happen for 40 years, it's like it's not even going to happen. I'll just do whatever I want now. They can't connect those two. They're physically unable. That part of their brain's not there yet. They can intellectually understand it, but whatever is beyond intellect that actually makes you lock into an idea, that's not there. And I have a feeling that for some people, it's never totally there.
Sure.
And so as much as you say it, some people are just never going to actually feel the reality of those parameters. And I think that you need to understand that about them. You need to understand that I'm saying this, lights are on, but nobody's home.
Yeah.
I'm going to proceed with this understanding, regardless of if they understand it or not, because that's what they're paying me to do.
Yeah, definitely something I hadn't maybe considered, that kind of how abstract the idea of kind of deadlines are to maybe artists. But yeah, I think you're right. Thinking it through and listening to what you're saying, and then kind of thinking back to times where I've had to kind of endlessly repeat something about deadlines is, yeah, I think there's definite weight to it.
Yeah, so think about how many times you've said things to somebody where it's almost as if you didn't even say it. It could be certain things like, this is the plan. We're going to do this and this and this, and you're going to do these 3 things. And I need them by this date or whatever, or we got to get this done. The deadline is in 48 hours or 2 weeks or whatever it is. And you've discussed this multiple times and they've nodded and agreed. And then 5 minutes later, as if you never even had that conversation.
Yeah.
How many times has that happened? Because it's hundreds for me.
Oh yeah, I mean, so
if not
much.
Thousands.
And there's a few points I think that they happen time and time again in specific areas. So people providing stems. You know, if you're just on a mix project and, you know, at some point you're speaking with, you know, the artist, or, you know, because again, over COVID, and I'm sure a lot of people listening and a lot of your other guests have been in a similar situation where a lot of it has been remote mixing, where an artist is maybe working from home all themselves, where they might have worked with other producers before. They're kind of working much more on their own now, and, you know, they book in with you, say, hey man, we want you to mix this song or whatever, and I'm like, that's cool. And part of my booking process is this is the deadline that I need the stems by. It's an agreed thing before they put a deposit down on a day. I'm like, I need you to understand that this is the day I need the stems. And I would say more than 8 times out of 10, I guess, there's always a bit of a delay. They're always like, I'm running a bit behind. Or I'll say to them, I've not got the stems. And they'll go, oh yeah. You said you needed them by this day, didn't you? You know, so yeah, that's a very common one. So yeah, you're right. I think it's, maybe you can say it till the cows come home, but it's the artistic side kind of takes over, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But you need to proceed anyways, as if you can't let that take you off track, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and again, I think sometimes it's just they're the times that maybe that do call for more of a blunt conversation. I've found, you know, or at least that's how I tend to deal with it in those situations where it's kind of there was some kind of agreement on timing of something, and then for whatever reason it's not happened. That's be the time I might then turn around and say, oh, this is what we agreed, and you can see that we agreed it here in that confirmation email that I send. So just to let you know, that's what we agreed on, and then that needs to happen, you know.
Man, I've noticed that even then some people just don't get it. Yeah. It's pretty hilarious. Switching topics,
Sure.
Something I wanted to talk to you about that comes up a lot actually in the URM group. People ask this question a lot. A unique thing about you is that you were most focused on making a career doing what you loved in music rather than trying to spread yourself over multiple disciplines. So you specialized early. And what do you think people miss about not throwing their whole selves into an art form, you know, or what would they gain by throwing themselves into an art form versus not specializing, just being a general recording engineer, for instance?
I mean, I think like the wider thing of throwing yourself into it is, I will just say that I think that is probably the most important thing that I've found for me, that in any of this, and I'm kind of conscious that I don't want to kind of come across like I've got all the answers, because, you know, you've spoken to many people and I've listened to many of your podcasts with people far more successful and knowledgeable on this than I. But having my small window of experience, the idea of not having a plan B has been a big thing for me. This idea that kind of a safety net, I think it's I don't think it helps a lot of the time, you know. I think actually just committing to something is huge, and saying to yourself, I'm not going to die if I fail, but if I keep something back as a kind of, I'll just study this just in case, or I'll just get a job, you know, that kind of mentality, I think, you know, it's getting out of your comfort zone and pushing yourself. is such a big part of getting that kind of initial jump on into this kind of as a career. But then beyond that into kind of specialization, I think, like, again, speaking just from my experience and my opinion on this, is that I can only do this job. This job takes so much time out of my life. It is what I do. So the idea of not being passionate about it seems completely foreign to me. So I can only work on projects that I really actually give a shit about. And if I know that I don't give a shit going in, I'll have to get out of that project as quickly as possible, you know, or turn it down, because I just don't think it's possible to prolonged periods of time do this without loving it, you know.
It's an interesting topic because in some ways specialization is going to make your life tougher in some ways, but in other ways it's the way and the light. So for instance, if someone knows that they want to be the best extreme metal producer in the world, they have no interest in other stuff. Like, they want to do the most brutal death metal and black metal bands, and that is what they want to be known for. Maybe learning how to mix country can somehow help.
Yeah.
But it really is the best idea, in my opinion, while you're trying to get as badass as possible in general, you need to throw yourself into that. You really need to throw yourself into that and live, breathe, eat, shit, bleed those genres.
100%, yeah.
Yeah. If that's not what you want, though, if you just want to be a recording engineer or a producer, it doesn't matter what genre, or there's like a certain direction. Like, you want to do heavy music, but like, you don't care what kind of heavy music. Like, that's just, you know, you're oriented towards heavy music. So it doesn't matter if it's pop punk or death metal or radio rock or what. Like, it could even be country with distorted guitars. Like, as long as it's like kind of heavy, it's your bag. That's cool too. I think the key is to understand what it is that turns you on about music. And that's not to say that you shouldn't learn other things. Of course you should, but there is only so much time on earth to do things. And the thing that gets you the most energized is the thing that you're going to spend the most time on.
Yeah.
And those are the things that we should try to be aware of and go towards. Because if we're not going towards the things that energize us, we're going to be competing against people who are.
Yeah.
And good luck to anyone who's trying to compete with people who are willing to work 18 hours a day and love it.
Yeah, exactly.
If they're not.
Yeah, I mean, I think locking yourself in on a genre, I mean, it's definitely never something that I even really thought about. So it seems slightly foreign, the concept to me, that being like, you know, this is what I want to do. But I totally respect people there. I realise there are people out there who are solely do one genre and they do very well at it. I've actually always kind of tried to do the opposite, I suppose, to some degree. I mean, I've never recorded opera, so I mean, I haven't been that varied, but you know, I've definitely try and kind of switch things up. And now if and where possible, I'll try and kind of not do two genres of the same thing back to back. But even so, yeah, I think the reason I do that is because I'm passionate about making music, or you know, making music that kind of comes from maybe an emotional place. So that for me is my passion, is that I want to work with music or work on projects that feel they have a kind of emotional resonance to it. So that could be a ballad that feels heartbreaking. I will get the same joy or passion for my job doing that as doing something that's just so disgustingly heavy that it makes you want to punch something. But it's genuine. It's, you know how some bands sound real when they're screaming and heavy, and some bands don't.
Yep.
And I think that comes down to that the reality of the intention, and you know, especially in the vocal. You know, so that for me is my passion. So that's what I'm always hunting for. Ultimately, I think, is kind of to work with bands that have the music means something to them. So yeah, I mean, I think if I turn down projects like, you know, or genres that I feel like I'm like not skilled in, because for exactly the reason you say, because if someone came to me and said, we want to do a kind of hip hop song or something, I'll have a stab at it. But there's people out there going to be way more talented at it than I, because they've put, 15 years into learning that genre and perfecting that craft than I've been doing with drums and guitars, So I think it's also, knowing when to be honest with people, I think, and say no.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's always something to be learned from stepping outside your comfort zone. But when you're doing this for a living, you have to recognize that you are taking people's money.
Yeah.
And you need to be upfront with them about whether or not you feel you're the person for it. They might see something in you that you don't understand, and they might insist. I do think it's important to be honest. If you don't feel you're the right person for it, just say it.
Yeah. And I think as well, like recently, I suppose in the last few years, I think I've learnt the ability to say no more, and on projects where either like for money, for financial reasons, or I think sometimes, some people kind of approach me because they want me to do it for geographical reasons or logistical reasons. They're based in the same area as me, therefore that's who you want to work with. And it's strange because, in that situation, very often I'm definitely not the right person for that job because, like I predominantly work in certain genres and certain fields and kind of feel like my kind of knowledge is kind of predicated on certain things. And if a band come to me and they just want to bang out some songs quickly and economically, and they're approaching me just because geographically I'm closest to them, or, whatever, or they like the look of a piece of equipment I've got, I'm quite comfortable now of just saying, oh, I don't think I'm the right fit for you, but here are some other people that may be a better fit, But it's taken some time to be able to understand that, because the reason I do that is firstly for them, because they're not spending money that they don't have to spend, but it's also for me because, like you said, it's this job it's a lot of hours, and I just really appreciate the idea that I don't want to get to a certain point in doing this job and lose the love for it because I'm working on things that are killing me or crushing me, So I only want to do stuff that I care about,
Yeah, the thing is, though, I need to just make this statement for Nail the Mix students. I just had to get this off my chest. There's some Nail the Mix students who will only work on the months that they like the artist, and I think that's dumb. You should work on every single one of them, exactly because you are a student.
Yeah.
And while you're a student, you should be trying to get as good as possible and learn as many different things as possible. What we're talking about here is specifically in a professional situation where people are paying you their money in exchange for your time and skills. That's different. That's very, very different.
Yeah. I'm saying this in a position that I'm in now, which is that, I've had my own brick and mortar studio for 14 years and worked in another studio before that. But, the first studio I worked in, I always make this joke, but I probably recorded someone singing a cover of the song My Way about 15 times in 6 months. And it was hilarious to me that they were all singing My Way. But, I didn't want to do that song. There was so much stuff I was doing, all sorts of things that it wouldn't have been my taste, but I was just enjoying learning. And I've certainly done plenty of projects that, wouldn't have been my first choice, but like I got so much from it. But, I'm saying now that, I choose to kind of focus on the thing purely because I've already put in a decade and a half into this already, that I've maybe earned or found myself in a luxury position that I have some degree of kind of choice in that, but it's definitely not a given. And yeah, I mean, there was nothing like Now the Mix, when I was starting. I'm so jealous of, people that are starting now with the unbelievable resources, and there was a song, the production has driven me crazy for maybe a decade or however long. I remember hearing this song and listening to the drums, and it drove me crazy because I was like, I know what samples sound like on drums and I know what live drums sound like, and it doesn't sound like either. It's got such a unique sound. And you did the unboxing video on that, and it was Redneck by Lamb of God.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like joyous for me watching that video that you did, because it was like, oh, I get to see behind the curtain of like, oh, and this is how they track that, and this is how Chris Adler tracked his hands separately and the shells separately, and that's why it sounds the way it does, because it's not a sample, it is a live snare drum, but it's just got no bleed. And that resource to me, like coming up, in a time where there was, no internet, or if there was internet, it was, emails, and to have this now, it's like, it's unbelievable. So it's just unbelievable resource. And I think, the resources you're giving kind of new engineers is honestly incredible. It really is. And even people like, that have done it for a few years like me, I'm still blown away with some of the content you've put out like that. So it's very cool.
Well, thank you. I was blown away when I did that unboxing. I remember that one specifically because how those drums were created has actually been a mystery in the metal community forever. Like the Lamb of God drums on those records was always a topic of conversation and intrigue, I think, for everybody in heavy music. And so to get to go through that was, I think, just as cool for me as it was for you to watch it. It was revelatory, and it made perfect sense too. I think that's part of what's cool about it also is one thing I've heard is lots of people will watch it and say, oh, okay, that's what I thought. It's good to get some confirmation that my instincts are correct on something, or this is what I was already doing, so I just have to do it better. And I think that's really, really valuable, whereas I think when you and I were starting, there was nothing like that. So we didn't know if we were doing something correctly, doing something incorrectly, if it was we just needed to get better at it, or if it was just a really stupid approach to something. I think people don't need to wonder about that anymore, which is crazy. I can't imagine growing up with that.
I mean, unbelievable. I remember because I reckon I was probably in a good 4 years, maybe not kind of doing it full time professionally, but 4 years into recording bands who were paying me something to do it before I even knew what drum samples were. Genuinely didn't know, didn't realize they were a thing. And I was in a band, and I used to kind of, I suppose how I kind of did a lot of my early recording before I was charging bands. I would record just my own band, like I'm sure lots of people do. And I didn't know drum samples were a thing because, like you said, these resources just weren't there. And certainly in that period, drum samples were always like a bit of a kind of behind the curtain thing that no one really liked to talk about anyway. So the drummer in my band, I just punished him on his kick drum. I'd be like, no, you're hitting it too soft. Listen to this record. It doesn't sound the same as when you play it. And he ended up having one of the most unreal feat because we didn't realize that with the records we grew up listening to and loving, like which were the fat, the Fat Records skate punk stuff, where it's like a kick sample doing those really super fast double kicks. He just learned to play that for real, just by absolutely hammering his foot, because we didn't realize that there was another option. So it was a constant, I think probably in the era that we came up doing it, you learn to do something and then you figure out that's not how it's done, and then you relearn. And whereas I think people that are coming up now are just bypassing so much of that trial and error because it's like, oh, this is kind of actually what you're supposed to do. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. That makes much more sense than my crazy idea that I've kind of tried to do to make it work,
Yeah, it's interesting, though, because sometimes, though, when you imagine what someone might be doing and you're wrong, you might come up with something kind of breakthrough.
Yeah.
Trying to figure it out, which is kind of what you were describing. I also think that lots of the amazing drummers that exist now, the ones that are, I guess, above a certain age, who came up in the mid-2000s or were learning in the mid-2000s, they didn't know that things were edited or, double kicks were drawn in. They just figured people played like that. And so they rose to the challenge and played some inhuman things, therefore raised the bar on what was possible.
Yeah, and I think the same with, there's a few singers I work with. Actually, I'll give a shout out to one of them. There's a band called You and Again Gravity, who, this band from the UK that are just absolutely ridiculous. But the singer, sometimes I've done a mix with him and he sent a note back saying like, oh, just can hear the tuning a little bit on this one note. And I'm like, there's no tuning. He can sing like it's tuned. It literally, he can sing a note so the way it climbs from one note to another or kind of, moves from one note to another, his vocally is so accurate. And I put that down to probably him growing up in a time where vocalists, were being tuned a bit harder, and he's literally learned to sing like that, so it's unbelievable accuracy with no vibrato. It's crazy.
It's funny you bring that up because there have been vocals that we've had on Nail the Mix where the producer swore the shit wasn't tuned and it sounds tuned and people thought it was tuned. But I know that the producer was telling the truth because I've recorded vocalists that sound like they have tuning on because they emulated that sound. They grew up hearing that and they sound tuned. They sound like they have auto-tune, like that specific auto-tune sound. Their voice sounds like it has it. It's a crazy thing, but it's real. It's definitely real.
Yeah, this is it, 100%. And this is what I have with that. I had more than on one occasion with this one singer. I mean, he is unbelievably talented. His vocal arrangements and stuff, musically, it sounds a bit like a cross between Deftones and Periphery, and then the kind of like math rock scene of like, you know, kind of like the BSM bands that I kind of came up working on. So it's just a real interesting mix, but he sings these like incredible vocal arrangements. He writes these kind of like 4-part harmonies, and but his voice is so accurate that like even he sometimes thinks that I've tuned it. I'm like, I haven't. I mean, obviously sometimes I have tuned it, but you know, there's been numerous times where he's literally as a mix note said, "Oh, can you just dial back the tuning on that note?" And I'm like, there is none on that note. That's just how you performed it on the day. So it is definitely possible. And I think the same with drum samples and like you said, drum editing and stuff. There's, you know, obviously I'm sure we're all familiar with certain drummers out there who are always at the middle of controversies over, is something edited or not? Is it triggered or not? You know, all of this kind of stuff. It's fascinating to see that like drummers have now learnt to literally sound like drum samples edited, you know, grid edited, and with samples, and that's just what they sound like. They've learned to emulate that with their hands. It's incredible. I mean, that is like why human beings are amazing, though, isn't it? That we can learn and evolve to do things like this so quickly. Unbelievable. Because it's 20 years, really, isn't it? 30 years tops that these things have been around.
Yeah, but you know, it makes sense. We're able to emulate and innovate. That's what's cool about us. It is kind of unbelievable, though, when you hear something that in years prior would have definitely been samples or tuning, but now people have just gotten that good. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. And I often, you know, wonder with certain people, is it because it was the same as, you know, it was with me? I mean, obviously, I don't really play drums. It was more me just punishing a drummer as opposed to me learning the skill. But, you know, we literally didn't know that drum samples existed. So when we listened to, like I said, the Fat Record stuff, like, you know, Lagwagon, No Effects, Strung Out, bands like that, and they're doing these super fast, you know, the skate punk speed, you know, stuff where it's got this double, you know, single double kick pattern, and it's clearly a drum sample. You know, you can hear it now, but at the time I didn't know that was a thing. So when he did it, I could hear the weakness of the second hit on the double, whether it was done with a single pedal. And I'd say to him, "Oh, it doesn't sound right. You need to learn how to do that better." So I just would punish him, and he learned to do it just because we didn't know. And I think that's probably just that similar thing with like drummers now and vocalists now. They maybe don't know that what auto-tune or, you know, pitch correction is. Therefore, they just think that's how you sing, and they modulate their vocal to do that. It is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, gonna have to wrap this up now, but before we take off, I just have one question left for you.
Okay.
You're talking about the UK production trend right now of having a really smooth and dark top end compared to the brightness of a lot of American productions, and I'm just curious what you attribute this regional preference for or to.
Partially historic. I think like there's kind of stories of when vinyl was being cut in like the 70s and stuff, that people like in the London studios would get the American records and kind of couldn't work out why the American records were perceived louder than the British stuff. And that's generally because the like American stuff has like traditionally a bit more of a tighter bottom end and just a bit more extended top end. But you know, obviously when you have a more pronounced upper mids, and that's where the perceived volume comes from. And obviously, you know, the less low end you have on something, there's more headroom, you can actually push things louder. So I think there's that kind of historical thing as well. So I think it's always been there to some degree. I think to me, there's always been a distinction between an American sounding record and a British sounding one. I mean, obviously, you know, you do get kind of outliers and like, you know, people in the UK who like make more American sounding records and people in the States who make more British sounding records. But as I think as a gross generalization, that's a thing. But then I think also it then becomes trends inside of that. And I think digital has got a lot better And I think a lot of that kind of harshness that maybe, to be honest, I probably grew up listening to, because that was what the music, what was, I was probably listening to music that was kind of transitioning from tape to digital. And at that time, people were like overcooking the top end, because that's how you had to capture stuff to tape. You had to push the top end in a little bit on the way in to kind of make sure it comes back sounding bright and not dead. And people were doing that to digital and then just ending up with these super brittle sounding records, and combine that with kind of quite low quality digital and, not particularly good conversion stuff. So I think music generally in like the 90s and early noughties probably was a little bit on the harsh side. So I think that's another factor. And I also think like the kind of the ending of the loudness war is probably another factor, as well as to why the kind of more smoother, fatter, rounder and warmer sounding records are probably becoming more popular again, because again it's like everyone's race to make everything the loudest is kind of it's not there as much, or it's kind of unnecessary, or it's obsolete, because you can make the loudest master in the world. It's only just going to get turned down when you listen to it on Spotify now. So I think people are focused more on making pleasant sounding records as opposed to loud aggressive ones.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. Thank you. Well, Oz Craggs, I want to thank you for coming on the URM podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm really glad we got to do this.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so as I said, it's a real honor to be here, and I think the resources you guys are giving people is phenomenal. So thanks to you guys for just providing such an amazing resource for everybody, and including myself. As I said, thanks for having me. A real honor to be asked.
It was a pleasure, sir. All right, then. Another URM podcast episode in the bag. Please remember to share our episodes with your friends, as well as post them to your Facebook and Instagram or any social media you use. Please tag me at EYAL Levy URM Audio at URM Academy, and of course, tag our guests as well. I mean, they really do appreciate it. In addition, do you have any questions for me about anything? Email them to me at eyal@urm.academy. That's EYAL @urm.academy, and use the subject line, Answer Me, EYAL. All right, then. Till next time, happy mixing.
You've been listening to the Unstoppable Recording Machine podcast. To ask us questions, make suggestions, and interact, visit urm.academy and press the podcast link today.